let me introduce the topic. Every month we have the CXO Advisory Group, which is a group of IT leaders from across the healthcare organizations that meet with the Washington HIMSS board. One of the topics that came up was project management, which is a big part of any IT organization. And Staci Currer from PeaceHealth was recommended by her CIO and as well as her VP of Technology. And she's going to be making a presentation, Adventures in IT Project Management. Afterwards, we'll have a panel with herself and Scott Waters from Overlake. Staci, I'll leave this to you.
Hi, thank you. Flip me here. Okay, thanks everybody for joining today. I know it's probably not the hottest thing going on today, but there's a few other things. But thank you for your time today, and I'm excited to share with you. We kind of adjusted the title a little bit to Adventures in IT Project Portfolio Management, and we'll get started. So the portfolio management just starts with a question, is just what's with the emphasis on organizational projects when we're IT? So, well, there's the research shows there's a direct correlation of business satisfaction and IT's support of planning and executing strategic projects. Oops, sorry, I hit my mouse. Distracted by a couple things. So sorry. You can see on the left, that's the reported importance where CIOs were asked to rank the importance of IT services. On the left is showing where projects are coming in at 10 out of 12. On the right, you're seeing what the importance is for the business satisfaction and where businesses are most satisfied with IT when we support projects. Of organizations reporting satisfied or fully satisfied with IT, again, projects were the most important service from IT, and that project service is the ability for us to help plan, support, and execute projects and initiatives that help the business achieve its strategic goals. So I'm just gonna repeat that. Projects were reported as the most important service from IT, and that the project service is IT's ability to help plan, support, and execute projects and initiatives that help the business achieve its strategic goals. So projects are showing to have the high correlation with business satisfaction and IT services. This shows there's that direct relationship with also strategy in projects. Strategy is accomplished through a series of successful projects. Our organizations are more successful when we execute successful project portfolios. And so this is where I begin our story. We had a new CIO and an endeavor to get better at executing our project portfolio. About 3 years ago, I dove into what became my portfolio management journey. It began when I was the analyst to support our IT PPM technology. At this time, there was work being done to stand up other governance standards. We had a new CIO who was very interested in our project portfolio, and the portfolio technology that I was supporting, this solution, had been in place for 10 plus years, a lot of changes within PeaceHealth, and I was just the latest of many admins over those years. And Will, our new CIO, had questions. He had lots of questions. Questions you would think that we could really easily get answered out of a database of project information. He really tried. Like, he tried really hard to navigate and understand the tool. He tried to understand the layout, but the output just didn't allow him to get the information he needed to understand the current state of the division. The message he was hearing was that we couldn't take on more projects. We were overtaxed and had too many requests coming in and getting approved. He could hear this and he could see it amongst the teams, but there was no way for us to represent the story in a way that was consumable for his leadership. And then, so we reviewed our problems. We continued to have projects piling on. We couldn't see clearly what was coming at us. We were reacting to the business operations demands. And that resulted in our resources being unclear on their priorities, because we would pivot just based on sometimes who was talking the loudest. We spread our resources too thin, and the result was that they were really unable to focus, and the productivity just wasn't where it should be for project completion. The projects were being initiated with clear objectives. The requirements, or excuse me, were being initiated without clear objectives or requirements, and that resulted in just dissatisfaction from customers. They were frustrated. We had frustrated IT employees. This often caused rework and our favorite, just the never-ending project. I do really think our resources just wanted to help and provide operations what they wanted, but we didn't really grasp the value of project completion. We did not have outcomes well defined, nor strong accountability or ownership from operational partners in completing our projects. So again, as the slide says, we had 99 problems. We knew them, and they probably sound familiar to you. And we had data. We had lots of data, but we couldn't tell our story. We lacked the ability to really see and understand the state of the portfolio of our projects. And you can see this slide just represents, we could give you a lot of information. We could show the number of projects we had, but we couldn't correlate that into what our division could do based on the resources that we had. We couldn't easily see what our teams were working on in the project space, or then easily forecast when resources would be available to take on more projects. And with this system and the way we had to get reporting out of it, the information was outdated as soon as the report was printed, because that was our database system at the time. And so quickly, Will and his leaders determined that we needed to make sense of the demand of projects for our decision makers. We needed to take control of the influx of our projects and change it from the fire hose to a steady drip, and enable our IT employees to really optimize our performance and project completion. And we also needed a way to provide visibility into the process and help monitor the portfolio. First, we worked through our strategy and process. We went through what our portfolio management strategy would be and why. We wanted project quality. We wanted stakeholder and sponsor engagement and ownership. We wanted to maximize IT's value to the business and improve the overall perception of IT's role in the business and in the projects. We wanted our IT caregivers to understand their priorities. We wanted to help plan a work in a way where we could complete projects at the right tempo while also doing what needs to be done to keep our lights on. We want our operations teams to understand the importance of a well thought out project and take responsibility for project outcomes. The visuals here represent the workflow that we began with the PPM system we had at the time, and just the processes that we were developing. So the flow chart is the representation of the workflow from a project idea to get through our governance council. And the governance council that we stood up is a committee of senior leaders who review the requests. They determine if the project was right for the organization strategy at the time of the project request. We also worked on establishing framework, so standard forms, criteria that defined a project, so the sizes, whether it required funding, owners and roles within each project. So defining a business champion, what that means, a project executive sponsor, what that means, an IT lead, and a project manager. And then the overall journey map of how this goes through the process. And we continued to work on clean data, project methodology, and reporting that would provide information to help guide decisions and give us a better understanding of our project throughput. We worked through this approach for about a year. We found we were still getting many projects approved, which probably doesn't sound like a bad thing, but it was still that approval perception to folks meant that their project would start right away and their resources were available right away. So that still led to some over commitments and under delivering. So then we came up to the next iteration. So our second approach, we focused on operational partnership and planning. We really needed, so we formalized a mid-tier, and that's what you see in the image that should be, I believe, on your left, that has the green boxes. So this mid-tier was to help support us ensure that we were implementing projects that were a system standard in these different council buckets. And they developed the initial layer of prioritization for our projects coming through the governance pipeline. And just ensured that what we were doing was aligned with a system standard across the board, and everybody agreed that it was something that should be done. And then having the mid-tier level of leaders engaged helped with our goal to transition that perception of IT. We were perceived as a decision-making body for project approval when it wasn't that IT was saying whether or not that they could do a project, but that was the perception. And so these councils began providing, again, that filter to prioritize projects and making sure projects were being moved through that were aligned with the organizational strategy. So then we also focused on resource management and sizing. This addition was that we required a review of resources and total effort before a project went to get approved for launch. This helped to give our IT managers a preview of what was coming, and we worked through a process where we could identify when a resource would be available to start on that effort. And it's not an exact science, it's just something that at least gives us a foundation and helps to move us away from that perception that once a project's approved, it just starts right away. So we also work on that earliest available start date. Then we worked on perspective planning. So we're trying to get ahead in the planning process and working with operational leaders to identify project requests in their department and what their strategic plan would be. So again, getting ahead of the projects instead of the operational team already being engaged and with vendors and ready to launch by the time TS or IT gets involved. With the perspective planning came roadmaps, and we started again a 2 to 3 year perspective plan session with operations. We thought that we could then use this roadmap to inform our project and governance planning. What we did find was that we weren't quite ready for a 2 to 3 year plan. We couldn't look ahead that far in all areas of the organization. But what we did like out of this was the roadmap view and the transparency that provided in showing that the projects, like all the projects that those councils were hoping to get done, kind of putting a more realistic spin on, again, showing visually what people are asking for. And the visual was a game changer for operations and our IT executive governance. So while doing all of that work, we also launched a new PPM software. So we started with just project information in our software for governance reporting. What we did was design and built out the information our leaders really needed to see the assembly line of IT projects and what we were managing. And this was another game changer. We had real-time portfolio information at our fingertips. We went with a system called QuickBase, which is a low-code, no-code platform that gives you a blank, like a relational database where you have a blank slate. So we built this really customized for PeaceHealth and for IT and the way we can manage our project portfolio. And then, you know, COVID-19, pandemic strikes and everything comes to a halt. We stopped work on all non-COVID projects. We all focused solely on COVID-19 related projects. We had a super narrow focus. We had alignment across the organization, and we completed amazing work to prepare our hospitals and our clinics and support patient care. And we did leverage, we leveraged QuickBase in this, and we leveraged our new portfolio management solution. And we learned that we can accomplish a lot of work, a lot of really complicated work when we're aligned together and we're focused on fewer projects at any given time. So we pivot again. We have another iteration where we assessed the prioritization council membership. We found that we really were very inclusive in the beginning with our mid-tier of governance, and we needed to make councils smaller, more nimble, and with those decision makers who can really evaluate priorities from a system perspective and in alignment with our strategic priorities. Then each chair, or each council has a chair that they designate to help facilitate discussions about those priorities. And this again is helping us change the perception that TSP is or IT's involvement in the project governance process. So we also honed our focus to top projects, and we're working to minimize distractions and the layers of work for our teams. Our councils were asked to focus on prioritizing an approved number of lanes or slots for projects. The new project is then sequenced, and that sequenced project can only begin once the project before it has completed. So we asked our councils to support us in determining those projects that will go in that number of slots. And we then, while doing that, addressed our backlog of projects and what was placed on hold during COVID. Does it really, what's the priority of it now? And does it get closed? Does it roll back? Or is it one that gets activated? So this developed our new pipeline principle for roadmaps. So this is a version of pipeline. This is just done in PowerPoint. So you can see that it can take some effort of managing, but this is again what's helped us create a culture of finishing projects. This visual helps our leaders understand that if they don't complete a project, they are holding up additional projects from getting done or started. So they don't, like human nature, they don't want to be the one that holds up another project. So this example here is what we then took from our mock-up in PowerPoint and developed in our QuickBase project management solution. And here we are. So I'll review some highlights and the principles, and that was a real highlight, a quick overview of kind of the iterations and the changes that we've made over the past few years. But here's just kind of a summary of principles. So creating transparency. Get the information at your fingertips and build that transparency amongst the organization. Build that transparency in both project execution and status. This will help, again, that project throughput and help the organization understand what is all going on. And I think what we've also discovered is from the operations perspective, once they get that visual as well and they understand what's going on, they're questioning when they should add additional projects themselves, because there's operational fatigue as well. Know that it's a journey. Recognize where you're at and iterate as you gain adoption and you get just organizational readiness. Take a look at your organization's culture, and that will help you determine what your organization will be prepared for. And know that iterations make people uncomfortable. I think it's the saying that I like, that we just don't let progress, or don't let perfection get in the way of progress. Work on, establishing something with some common goals, and know that your process, again, can only be as good as your organization is ready for. So then you build on it. Develop that roadmap pipeline so that as soon as a project finish, the next project can begin. It's that principle. The experience that we've had shows that people are okay, that they understand about demand, and that the project will be scheduled in, and they will be patient as long as they can see this on a picture. So instead of saying no, you're changing your response so that we can slate it and go in that pipeline, those lanes. And then this also reinforces that projects need to be finished before another can start. And I think I've said this probably 5 times, maybe slightly different ways, but that's been something that we've really been focused on in this latest iteration, so that we're not saturating our resources, both operationally and with TSP, with projects, and losing that momentum and productivity. And finally, if you don't want to be the IT leader that always says no, create that visibility and transparency so that operational leaders are controlling the demand. These principles and this process changes our story from we can't do that to and we're too busy to just let's see when we can do this. And so it helps with that. It helps with the story and engagement and trust and our reputation. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you, everybody. So I think I'll hand it over to David.
Thanks, Staci.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Staci. That was great. Scott, I'm curious how what Staci and Peace have kind of been doing, how that kind of differs there at Overlake. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I don't think it differs a lot. Staci and I actually had a really good conversation about this, and we've at Overlake, while we're not part of a larger system, we've had the same exact issues as Staci described in her presentation. I think she did an excellent job of outlining a really functional governance structure. I'm actually going to steal a couple pieces from Staci on that. But it was the same journey, right? We started with IT having to kind of drive things forward and being the department of no from time to time. and started to kind of change that narrative from that to, hey, let's look at what the universe looks like. So we have 15 different service line leaders, all with their own list of projects that they want to get done in any given year. And so we said, well, let's take a look at what that full inventory of project demand looks like. And we had a couple of strategic retreats with senior leadership and came up with, we started with a spreadsheet of all the projects that everybody wanted to do. And I think it was something like 325 projects. And we don't have that many project managers. We don't have that many operational leaders or resources to get that many projects done in a calendar year, right? And so I just stood up in that meeting and I said, does anybody else think that we can do 300 plus projects in a year? And everybody kind of nodded their head like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. And so we started there, create the inventory, and then let's look at what's the most important use of our time and resources. And that was year one. And I think back to Staci's point of iteration, that part's really important. I think if you try and slam this in a fully baked format into any organization, the change with that is going to get a lot of pushback. So iteration, walking people through a kind of roadmap, not only just project sequencing, but this whole process maturity, start with an inventory, move on to prioritization, and kind of so on and so forth.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just for those folks that are participating and watching listening to this panel discussion, if you have questions, we have the chat function there at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to live chat a question. We can get those answered. But this can be to either of you while people are probably putting in some of those questions. I'm just curious, obviously the pandemic has affected everybody very greatly in a number of different ways. With regards to project management and your project portfolio, what was the biggest pain point? Because I'm sure there were several, obviously, having to go fully telehealth, probably fully remote right out of the gate. Especially some organizations probably didn't have some of the tools and technology platforms that they needed in place when that first happened. So I'm just curious kind of what that looked like from both of y'all's perspective.
I'll let you start, Staci.
Oh gosh, okay. So from your question is just meaning what happened to our portfolio and all the projects and how and our strategy.
With the shift of obviously going from an on-site, usually working in meetings or as many conference calls, etc., to a fully remote organization, especially like with almost all of the IT organizations have been fully remote since the pandemic first set in and still are out here in the Pacific Northwest. So with that setting in, what was the biggest pain point? Because I'm sure there are a number of them with regards to the project management piece of it.
I think I mean, wow, the amount of work that our desktop teams did. So just their coordination to get people set up with the right equipment to get home. And then from project management, I think we were able to use our system, our QuickBase system, to make sure that we continue to focus on the priorities that were key from our COVID command center. And so establishing a very quick workflow of information coming through a COVID command, and then managing those tasks and on a daily to semi-weekly process. And everybody understood projects stopped and new projects spun up very quickly. So I think some methodology and expectations were out the window to some extent, while we all still made sure that we met some really aggressive timelines, I think. And then just communication. So our IT division, I think I didn't have any sort of business disruption that I experienced from being able to work from home and still get what we needed done. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but.
No, that makes sense. And each organization is different, no question. Scott?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously I actually was deliberate in saying all non-essential projects are halted, right? And that was, I think most organizations probably did that. And then we quickly just kind of scrambled the team together and said, what are the most urgent things that need to get done? Obviously mobilize our workforce so they can, and departments and all kinds of things so that they can work remotely while we were still figuring out the extent of the pandemic. I mean, we're talking the first couple of weeks where we really didn't know what was going on and how long it would last. So I think we stopped most project work, but we did keep our eye on a handful of what we deemed as critical enterprise kind of strategic projects. So we have a campus revitalization and building project that was well underway, building a tower, and we kept that project rolling. And then we were implementing a new ERP system, and we kept that one rolling. We did have to phase it out and kind of extend the timelines, but we did keep focused on that. And I think the funny, kind of interesting thing about it was when I put the request, or actually, I guess a mandate that all of my team work from home, the productivity and the focus was laser sharp. And I think that the removal from day-to-day operations and the focus on from kind of being removed from the campus was actually really helpful to get these specific kind of COVID support projects done.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. We've seen that kind of across the board with a number of the organizations out here in the Pacific Northwest, but also nationally, and that productivity went kind of through the roof. That kind of brings up another question that we had. When it comes to burnout, that is one piece that we're kind of seeing. It's just some folks, because work's always there and there's always something to do, especially in today's world. How do you kind of manage? How do you manage that balance, especially now that everyone is fully remote and they can do so much more?
Yeah, I mean, that's hard. And, you could kind of extend that into how do you create these barriers between if you're working from home and that's your place you go to kind of recharge after a hard day of work, but that's actually your location for doing your work as well. How do you create those barriers and those transition points throughout your day? We've all struggled with that, I think. All of us have worked from home and, been hard at work, one Zoom meeting after another, and then we look up and it's 7 o'clock at night. And that can happen really very easily. I think you have to rely on your on the lines management, these team leaders, and really creating a culture that says, hey, we'll tell you if it's urgent. So I've actually gone to the extent of saying, hey guys, this is not a after hours or weekend request. Please don't do this after hours or on the weekends. Let's keep this within the kind of normal business hours. So I've been pretty deliberate in the way that I submit my requests, and I've asked the rest of leadership to do the same. If it's urgent, let us know, and we also want to know why it's urgent so that we can kind of allow our folks to make the right decisions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that was actually another question that we had got. It goes right in line with what you were just saying. How do you manage which projects get to supersede? Because obviously the pandemic was a global situation, something that had to be responded to immediately. But like you mentioned, even with your ERP project, you had to bump it and stretch out the timeline a little bit. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't know how Staci did it at PeaceHealth, but this was just old-fashioned sit down at the table with senior leadership and let's look at this list of projects and let's highlight and it can't be 30 projects, it's got to be 7. What are and we can't even guarantee those. So let's force rank a short list of less than 10 projects, and we will do our best to continue to move those forward, knowing that those are going to take kind of second seat to anything that's urgent for the command center or, enabling, health delivery in a remote situation like telehealth or something like that.
And that's where we really reinstated that pipeline process. So it was also a sit at the table situation where each portfolio manager would go back to their council and review the projects that were put on hold and really reestablished priorities there. And then we also said, we aren't going to turn on as many as we did before. You have these lanes, let's sequence them out, and so we can focus and get them done. I think also partially, preparing for another, what else may come out of the pandemic and COVID work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
This would be for either of you, whoever, but it kind of goes in line with what we were just talking about. But obviously along the way, you have to, with everything that's gone on this year, as well as everything that's coming up technology-wise, impacting the project plans, getting everybody on the same bus going the same direction can be challenging. I'm just curious, one, if that's happened, or if you've really seen that. I feel like the pandemic kind of brought people together, so I feel like we saw that a little bit less. And also, if you have seen that, what have you done to potentially counteract that?
We haven't really seen much pushback from operations. I think all of our leaders are well aware of what we're facing, right? So I think it actually has been a pretty good showing of solidarity and support for everyone. And I think we've had lots of instances of, heroic efforts and Herculean tasks being done to support different things that really build a lot of goodwill, right? And I'm sure that's the case across the board. Every healthcare organization is doing the same thing. So it's a pretty good time as far as support. I mean, people are getting tired. Obviously, we're all getting tired, getting this fatigue of pandemic and just kind of, there's a lot going on. But I think the overall support that's been shown has been pretty impressive.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I would say just part of, I was just going to say, part of our journey has been in this kind of this governance and kind of collaboration with operations space. So I also agree that we've seen a lot of collaboration and even more reinforcement with those visual pipelines and what people are approving and moving forward or not, and as portfolio managers, we make sure that we are trying to hold the line as projects come through, and if someone says they're a priority, then we ask what has to be moved or what can be moved, and it's a discussion, so it's not an IT decision.
Yeah, Staci, I think Staci said something that was probably one of the more important things. If anyone takes away anything from today, it's how do you build that story, right? Because as someone that's in the details in the IT area or a PMO, you kind of know the ins and outs of a bunch of different projects that are going on, and you generally know the why, or have a pretty good understanding of the why. But building a story and being able to visualize that is really important for leadership to be able to make decisions and help prioritize all the different asks. So the amount that you could not spend enough time creating really effective stories and visualizations for your portfolios. It's hard to show multiple different projects on one kind of sheet of paper, and finding a way that resonates with within your culture of your organization is really important.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense and is incredibly important. As you're building these stories, kind of a follow-up question to what you just mentioned, as you're building these stories, I'm sure you're also probably either building champions within various business units that you have to work with, or at least thinking about it at a bare minimum. I guess, how have you, what have you seen successful from kind of building that support as you build out that story with that in mind?
I think it's the attitude change in folks. I know there's an example of a senior leader who was notorious for expanding scope and pushing out project end dates, and now she's the one that's going through and canceling projects, or putting her foot down in places to make sure that a project objectives are completed and we don't expand scope. So I think just the transition, so building those champions through the through that visualization and that transparency of work, and making sure that they understand if a project's stuck, why it's stuck, and where they can help us remove the obstacles we've just seen a shift in just that engagement from that project ownership level from operations. But over time too, like for sure over time.
Oh yeah, no question. I'm sure it takes quite some time. Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you look at any project, or most projects, they have a fair amount of change, kind of management that needs to be applied to them. And people are people, and we always want to know what's in it for us. And so if you can kind of build out the what's in it for them, or what's in it for me story with any of the stakeholders, whether they're the business leaders or the individual contributors, I think that effective change management applied to all of this stuff is really the glue that holds it together, and allows you to get rid of some of those barriers. And like Staci said, turn some of the folks that were bringing a lot of challenges in the way of kind of keeping scope narrow and tight, and turn them into champions. And that's a big success story.
Yeah, that makes sense. This was a question from the group as well. When you go to do that, I'm sure culture is I know culture obviously is a big portion of that. And with everything transitioning to remote, building a culture around your projects and or project teams can be probably more challenging, or it definitely is more challenging. I think we're all obviously looking for just to hear what you have done potentially, either of you, what's worked, just to kind of share ideas, because I think we're all probably looking for good ideas there.
So I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. So how do we build that culture to where we're kind of removing those barriers? Is that the question?
Yeah, building kind of a subgroup culture, right? Because any major big initiative, right? You have your project team. A lot of organizations, at least from what I've seen, typically build kind of a mission and get everybody. It's part of getting everyone bought in, but it's kind of your team culture as well. And so I think from that perspective, whether it be the subgroup project team or just in general, building a team culture, what you've seen be effective for your organization, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, I'll go back to change management, but there's a lot of different frameworks you can follow. All of them point to the data, which is visible and approachable and engaged executive sponsorship is key, right? If the executive that's sponsoring the project can articulate the why in many different ways to build out the story for the project team, then you get pretty fast buy-in right off the bat. And if they're constantly visible in the project, a lot of times, an executive sponsor, I've been guilty of this, and from time to time, gets involved in the project at kickoff and then kind of disappears into the background, and the project manager has to lead this project forward, and it's a tough job. Project managers have to lead by influence, and that's not easy. So I think the more often that executive sponsor is visible and is adding to the dialogue, the more successful the project's going to be. And it kind of starts to build that culture of ownership, and it leads from the top. Yeah,
you instill that ownership of the project in them as well, not just your team. That makes sense.
Right.
Staci, is there anything that you've seen?
So you took me straight back to, we launched, so at the onset of COVID, we had to establish our video visit project. So that was just thinking of, how did we work together and establish the team and keep that culture. And I think that I relied a lot of just on foundational project management of communication and status, and working with those senior leaders to provide them kind of that high level roadmap of our implementation of so knowing that they were engaged, and then working with the project team and establishing some sub teams too, so that the full project team wasn't always involved when they didn't need to be, but also, which it kind of goes against typical principles, but we did have a really large project team meeting just for the fact that we were moving so fast, and we had a lot of decision and discussion points to work through. So having the full project team there, from patient access to and in the operational side to IT and marketing communications, it was a lot of meeting hours, but it was a way to keep them connected throughout a really fast-paced project. So I think just communication and the expectations from the project team perspective.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, Staci, did you, how did you do the communication for the various pieces? Did you, because I don't know your exact team structure. Do you have one person per initiative? Is it maybe a team within the project team? I'm just curious, how does that work?
So, we leverage Yammer was one tool just to keep people informed of what was happening and kind of different milestones. We used just email, so using a team site for the full project team, a OneNote for note reference, like people could always reference a shared OneNote for going back to that. And then we have an internal newsletter that goes out for communication across, when we went live, across all facilities, and then we had communication within our education teams to work with physicians and training and front desk staff. I think that, yeah, so lots of channels of communication.
Yeah, basically you can't over communicate, really.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Very cool. We had one more question here before we wrapped up from the group. They just asked to verbalize the current plans around cybersecurity and potentially the continued expansion of telehealth, with regards to just in general your remote access programs. I think everybody's obviously looking at both of those pieces, probably having to continue to expand as we move into 21. But we'd love to hear what you all have planned.
Yeah, this is actually one of the most kind of top of mind topics, obviously for me and I'm sure everybody else, but it really depends, right? So certainly through the pandemic, as long as payment parity is in place for telehealth, then you're going to see expansion. We all saw like huge expansion of virtual visits, specifically video visits, at the height of the pandemic. And then we all saw it drop back down to something a little more reasonable, definitely higher than what we had pre-pandemic. But for the future, it really depends on what the payment parity ends up being, if there is one. So if payment parity stays in place indefinitely, then you're going to see it's a huge shot in the arm for telehealth. If it doesn't, then you're going to see probably a shrinking of the focus a little bit. I think that the one thing, regardless of what happens with payment parity, the one thing that's going to stay in place is the fact that this has forced all of our patients, all of us, to become fairly proficient with video virtual visits and video meetings. And so the expectation from our patients is going to be much higher now. And so we'll have to keep some version of video visits in place, regardless of what happens with payment parity. But I think the focus and the investment is going to shrink a little bit if we're not getting paid the same. So.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Absolutely. Staci?
I don't know. I think we echo that. We worked really hard to get our ambulatory set up. I think we have, we pulled back in some of the inpatient setting systems. So we got one set up, but then we've pulled that back to reevaluate a vendor. And I imagine, there will be a time where that spins up again, and for internal telehealth, or telemedicine, I think there is some other expansion ideas, but again, I do agree that it really, kind of the speed in which it's done probably depends on that payment piece.
Yeah.
And then security, like cybersecurity
sure.
is just a huge focus in general, and I am on the outskirts of that, so I don't really have a ton to add. I just know that our teams are working really hard to put some things in place to just beef up some things that we had planned that are just now being expedited.
Yeah, and I think the cybersecurity piece is going to be interesting as well, right? There were some waivers offered through the HIPAA requirements to allow folks at the height of the pandemic to use consumer level type of video solutions like FaceTime and things like that. We opted not to go down that route. So we stuck with the HIPAA requirements and security practices for the solutions that we were implementing the whole time. So I think we're in a good place there from a security perspective, but I could see the immediate need, really forcing a lot of organizations to leverage those consumer grade solutions. And now they're going to have to take a step back as those waivers are lifted and restrictions are tightened back down, and really look at what their long-term solution is going to be for telehealth.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much. This was absolutely great today. We got a ton of feedback already, as I'm sure you can see in the chat. But we appreciate your time. I see everybody is tuning in today. We thank you for attending. We're going to have this recurring over the next few weeks over various topics. So please check our website so you can see which events which topics you'd be most interested in kind of plugging into. Dwayne, did you have anything else that you wanted to say before we wrapped up?
Thanks, David. Yeah, I just wanted to, again, thank Staci for your presentation. I think that was really informative, and everybody's going to be going back to their organizations with a lot of ideas and thoughts. Scott, you as well. It's just great to have participation in different organizations willing to share what's going on and what they're working on. And that's part of the whole HIMSS model, is to allow people us to learn from sharing ideas and having these types of conversations. So as you see on the screen, I hope you'll join us tomorrow with Paul Keckley. He is the principal and the founder of the Keckley Report. Organizations spend multiples of thousands of dollars just to hear what he has to say on a topic. And he's putting some slides together tonight after the election. Obviously, we're not expecting to have all the results, but he's going to be talking about what we can expect for the next 4 years. So it's going to be lively, and I guarantee you'll have at least 1 or 2 nuggets you can take back to the water cooler and come out as the smartest person there. So join us tomorrow. Thanks again, everybody, for being a part of this, and we look forward to hearing from you again. Thanks.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.